You realize the only way you're going to be able to heal those things, we can't, that it's going to have to be trusting God, and that ultimately only, Jesus is going to be the thing that can come in and heal those places where you've been so wounded and so broken. And, we try to Band-Aid over them with, well, now I'm happily married. I found a husband. We have a daughter. We're creating this new, better life. And that's true. But there's still those things that remain that I think God really wants to get to the root of, because he doesn't want us to walk around with those things that are inside of us that are just waiting to bubble up and come out really sideways later on in life.
Mean Girls. It was a movie. You guys remember that movie?
You can't sit with us.
You can't sit with us. Maybe you've experienced it yourself. Real life pain can be great and deep. The question is, how do we deal with mean girls without becoming one too? Our guest today is Melanie Shankle. She's a 3-time New York Times best-selling author of Sparkly Green Earrings. That sounds like fun. The Antelope in the Living Room. That sounds destructive. And Nobody's Cuter Than You. I love that.
Thank you.
Yeah. Her latest book is Here Be Dragons. Here comes the lawn team as well.
Yeah.
And,
I told you.
We're just doing life together here.
Yeah.
Right. Treading the deep waters of motherhood, mean girls, and generational trauma. And you also part of a podcast called the Big Boo Cast as well.
That's right. Those are all my things. So thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here with y'all today.
Along with Sophie Hudson, which we've interviewed here before. She's been a blast. So welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me this morning.
So just to get us kicked off, would you give us an overview of the book? Because I think, you intended to go one way, but you sort of ended in an unexpected detour. Talk about that.
Yeah, it's funny. When I first pitched this book to my publisher, I hadn't written a book in about 5 years. I'd just been in this lull because one of the things I say is every time I finish a book, I'm like, I'll never write another book. So it takes me a couple of years to get my nerve back up. And so I really thought, my daughter had just gone off to college at that time, and I thought, I think there's a book that's there about mean girls and what that looks like in high school and what she had dealt with, because I felt like what I was seeing as I talked to different women, I was like, this is an epidemic. Like, we're all dealing with this on some level. And so that was the book I thought I was going to write. What I didn't realize until I kind of started going through it and figuring out the book and outlining it was the ways that I had to heal, the generational trauma that I had come from, and that my first mean girl was my mom, and what that looked like and the ways I needed to heal to be able to raise a daughter who could navigate that. So that is kind of the overarching story of the book.
Okay. So Here Be Dragons, that's a cool title. Talk about where that came from.
Yeah, so I had read an article years ago, way before this book, and it just talked about how in ancient medieval times, when people would go in search of new lands and they would take off and they would explore, when there were places on the map where maybe another ship had sunk or they had seen something there or they just thought there might be danger ahead, they would mark it in Latin and they would say, "Here be dragons." And it was just a way of saying, like, hey, be careful, there's danger up ahead, like just be on your guard. And when I read that, it just resonated with me so much, because I thought, isn't that all of us in life, where you're just sailing along, and if only we could have it marked where we're like, oh, here's some danger up ahead, like we can dodge and swerve. Sadly, it doesn't work that way, but you never know when the dragons are going to pop up.
True. Yeah.
Now, you touched on this about realizing that your mom was your first mean girl.
Yeah.
And this is not the book that you thought you were going to write. Can you tell the story of like the defining moment when that hit you, what it was that made you realize that?
So my friend Sophie, my podcast partner, she was an English teacher in her former life. So she's always looking for themes and subtext. And she said, do you realize, because she used to work with teenage girls, and she said, do you realize the ways that God had to make you healthy to be able to navigate this? She said, I think that's part of your story, is knowing like what you came from and what your mom was. And I was like, yes, I get that. Well, then the way life came together, God did what God does. And I used to say this would be the book I would write, and I used to say the title was going to be Now That Everybody Has Died. Like, because you're kind of like, you have to, there's just...
Now that everybody has died.
Now that everybody has died, here's the real story. Because there's just things that I always knew I couldn't tell.
Oh.
And, you know, while my mom was still living, well, after I signed the contract for this book, about 2 weeks later, my sister called me and said, hey, mom has been diagnosed with this very aggressive sarcoma. And so my mom actually passed away as I was writing this book, which all of a sudden gave me the freedom to tell part of the story that I never would have told had she still been alive.
Wow.
Yeah.
I think, you know, so many of us are walking around with some sort of trauma that we've not healed from. And we just pretend like it doesn't exist. It's okay. It really is very important to deal with that, though. Like, talk about the ways that it's, you know, just helped you moving forward.
You know, I think it's so easy to, what we want to do is put a Band-Aid over it. You know, we want to look at the painful parts of our life, and it hurts. You know, sometimes it's like anything. Sometimes I always say, like, if you break your arm and you don't get it set right, you know, it may heal, but it didn't heal the way it was supposed to. And a lot of times then you hear people have to go back in and have it rebroken so that it can heal properly. And so I think sometimes the healing journey almost causes us more pain because we have to face those things that maybe we've wanted to brush over or pretend that they're all fine. But the hurt is still there. And I think at some point, my husband always says, and I say this in the book, he doesn't say it as delicately as this, but I'll say it. He's like, if you don't deal with your stuff, it's going to come out sideways. And so at some point, those things are going to come up if you have not allowed them to heal.
That's true. Yeah, no, I feel like I spent a large portion of my life because there was just some trauma with my dad and him not being a part of my life. And for the longest time, I was like is it the ostrich or the emu that sticks their head in the sand? La 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 la,
Yeah.
it's fine. It's fine.
Yeah, it's all fine. It's all fine. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Wow. You know, I think that those times, sometimes, Misty, it does seem like that's the simplest way to deal with it, just to pretend like it's not there. And yet it is. And so just knowing that you intended to do one thing with your book and this other thing came up and you had to deal with that is a reminder to all of us. There can be a lot more to what you're dealing with, even if it's not you. Maybe it's a friend. Maybe it's somebody you know and you see this kind of curious behavior. And I think it's really helpful to think what's really behind this. So in the chapter, the things handed down to us, you go back on your mom's background and let's just talk a little more deeply about how looking at it from her perspective has helped you change the narrative that you dealt with growing up.
When you go back on my mom's side of the family in particular, there was so much generational trauma and dysfunction. There was addiction, there was alcoholism, there was depression, there was mental illness. And so you start to see those things and the way that they continue to be perpetuated. And I think for me, there was always this fear of, I don't want to be this. Like as soon as I became aware of this is the root of a lot of those things, you can recognize what you don't want to be. So, but it was like, how do you do that? And you realize the only way you're going to be able to heal those things, we can't, that it's going to have to be trusting God. And that ultimately only, Jesus is going to be the thing that can come in and heal those places where you've been so wounded and so broken. And, we try to Band-Aid over them with, well, now I'm happily married. I've found a husband. We have a daughter. We're creating this new, better life. And that's true. But there's still those things that remain that I think God really wants to get to the root of, because he doesn't want us to walk around with those things that are inside of us that are just waiting to bubble up and come out really sideways later on in life.
It's one of those things where there's going to be pain involved.
Yes.
So, thinking about, okay, I know I need to do this. So it was at a writing retreat, as I understand it, that a friend asked you a couple of questions that turned out to be life-changing. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so I went to, now let me just say, my husband Perry called it a loser's retreat. I was like, I'm going to go write with some friends. I know, listen.
So supportive.
Just as sensitive. I was like, I need to go be with some writer friends. He's like, where are y'all going? I was like, we're going to a cabin in Highlands, North Carolina. We're just going to sit and talk about our books and all this stuff. And he's like, so a loser's retreat. And I was like, yeah, whatever. So it's fine. We had a great time.
We love our guys.
Yeah, listen, they're going to shoot us straight. So I went, but that night so it was my friend Erin, who's just written a book, and Sophie, who's a writer also, and the three of us were just talking about our books. and Erin asked me the question. She was like, when did you know that your mom was unhealthy? And I had never really thought about it from that perspective because, as a kid, I just think there's so much, whatever you grow up in, you tend to think is normal. I mean, it has to be really off for you to realize this isn't normal. And I think that awareness comes gradually as you you go off to college or, you get to high school and you start to look around and go, oh, for me, it was like, oh, not everybody else's mom stays in bed all day. My mom did. And I didn't know. I just thought, well, that's what moms do. They just stay in bed all day. And then you start to realize, oh, that's not the way other homes function. But that was such a key piece in me starting to put it together and kind of go back and do, I guess, kind of the forensics of when did I really start to notice that things weren't right, and how did that shape my early life and my early adulthood?
Wow. And I just really applaud you for doing that, because really in a situation like you grew up in, from my reading the details in the book, I think that's necessary. It's necessary to look back through the pain and both be aware that these were her problems really just being put back on you. And that's where the healing can begin. Family relationships can be very difficult.
They can be so difficult. And, I was talking to a friend about this the other day. I said, it's funny because I've had so many people reach out to me since the book came out. And I thought there are different degrees of generational trauma. And even as I wrote this book, I think there's this little voice inside of me that was like, well, this wasn't that bad, or other people had it so much worse, or there's so many more terrible things that could happen. And that's true. That's very true. Those things are very true. But I also thought what that trauma looks like is when any child, if you've had to be something emotionally in your parent's life that a child was never intended to be, that messes up the way that you relate to other people, the way you see yourself, the way you function in the world, because you were carrying a burden as a kid that you were never meant to carry.
Yeah. Appreciate that.
That's amazing. Let's talk about, I'm a dad of a daughter and a son, and my daughter had special needs. She's in heaven right now. We lost her last summer. But how do you view a dad's role in a kid's life, and how is that different from a mom's role when there's trouble?
Yeah, I think dads are so important. Just the value of a strong dad cannot be overestimated. I always say that I think dads, here's my example, here's my story. When my daughter Caroline was 6, my husband is a big outdoorsman. He hunts, he fishes, he does all the things. And so my daughter, he started taking her at age, 3. He would take her and was teaching her how to do all the things. And so one night I was setting our places for dinner and we were having steak, and I didn't put a steak knife at her spot. I put a dull knife. And she asked me, she said, why don't I get a steak knife? And I was like, well, because you may cut yourself. And Perry said, she skins her own deer at the ranch after she hunts them. And I was like, oh, I did not know that. I'm glad I didn't know that, because I would have been terrified. I'm glad that was a secret y'all kept from me. But it was just that realization of moms, I think we want to coddle and we tend to maybe over nurture at times. And that was certainly my tendency is, we don't want our kids to feel any pain and we want everything to be easy. And I think dads sometimes are the ones that come in and say, we're going to toughen up. You need a little bit of grit. You need a little bit of character. And I think we're raising a generation of kids that are going to need to know how to be strong, how to be fighters. And life is going to be hard. And so we can't make everything super easy. They've got to learn how to use a steak knife. That's the thing. They have to know how to do that.
Yeah. So where was your dad when you were growing up?
So my parents got divorced when I was 8. It was very tumultuous because of my mom. But I will say that for me, my dad, even with them being divorced, he came to see us every other weekend. That was the custody agreement, but he never missed one of his weekends. He was always there. When we still lived in the same city, he came to see us once a week, and we spent a night at his place. He called me. I can honestly say my dad called me every night of my life until I was out of college. Even if it was just a quick, and here's the thing now that I know after I'm raising a teenager, God bless him, because there were times I'm sure I was like, yeah, okay, I gotta go. Could not have cared less,
Right.
But I look back now and I'm like, the fact, knowing that he had to deal with my mom and he knew better than anybody what my mom was in a lot of ways, But the fact that he stayed in, and I know the easier thing would have been for him to just kind of walk away or distance himself from it. And knowing that my mom, in so many ways, and I write about this in the book, tried to vilify him, but that he always stayed so present that it was really hard for her to do that. Like if he had decided to opt out, it would have been much easier to believe. But I knew somewhere, even as a kid, I was like, what she's telling me doesn't line up with the man that I see. And so, I would tell people, if you find yourself in that situation, I think it's so important to fight for your kids and to stay there, because kids, need both parents. I think especially after something as traumatic as a divorce has happened, they need both those parents to stay in their life and to be present.
Oh, especially then.
Yeah.
I agree 100%. When did your husband Perry come into your life?
So I met Perry during my last year of college. It was a fifth year. Let's just say I took a victory lap. So it was I needed I needed another football season, And so I stayed. We met through a Bible study at the end of that year. And then he was coming home to San Antonio. That's where he's from. I moved to San Antonio because I got a job. And when you graduate while on scholastic probation, you'd be shocked at the offers that don't come in. So I basically took the first job that I got in San Antonio. And so a mutual friend reconnected us. So Perry came into my life. I was about 23 years old at that time.
And apparently he was involved in you kind of helping unpack the story with your mom.
Yeah, it was funny because Perry he's very discerning. He always has been. He sees things for what they are. And when he met my parents, I had kind of given him this whole story of, here's how I grew up, here's what the situation was. It was one where my dad had very much been vilified and made to be the bad guy, along with my stepmom, who had come into my life later on. And so after Perry met both of them separately, he was the one that very gently, because you don't always want to hit somebody super hard with, these hard truths, but he was like, hey, so I'm just going to say, he was like, the people that I met the night that he met my dad and stepmom, he was like, this doesn't line up to me with what you've been told. He said, I don't think this is right. And, I think sometimes it takes a fresh set of eyes, because we've been so enmeshed in everything we've grown up in and seen and told, that when you have a new perspective, all of a sudden, and he said something that I think I'd always suspected deep down, but I'd never been able to put a voice to. And that kind of began the unraveling, because it led to me having a conversation with my dad. It led to my mom coming clean and telling me basically all the ways that she had lied.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And which I will say, we had that conversation one time. And then later, when I asked her about it, she was like, I don't think that's right. I don't know who told you that. And I thought, well, you told me that. So it was interesting how she, for whatever reason in that moment, which it feels like God gave me that clarity in that moment where she told the truth, because later on, she very much tried to take it back and go back to her version of what the truth had been.
Wow. Man, well, you just gave me some hope, though, that can happen. That's what we pray for with... My husband was married before me, and the lies that his ex-wife told their sons has led to total estrangement. They're adults. Yeah. They have kids.
I'm so sorry.
Me too. And it's hard to watch, but, praying all the time that maybe she understands it would be beneficial to present the real version of him.
Yeah.
So dealing with your daughter's mean girls, Dad, oh goodness. So obviously it's hard. It's hard for the kid. My group of mean girls in high school, actually the ringleader was a boy. It's kind of the mean girl situation though. And I was hospitalized for mental health reasons. And this group found out about that and tortured me with it the rest of my high school career. So almost 3 years. And as difficult as that was for me being in that situation, the hurt that it caused my mom to watch me go through it. Yeah. And I'm sure that it was so hurtful to you. It's not easy to see other kids hurt your child.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like that's the part of parenthood that nobody prepares you for, because you don't know, because we've all gone through it, in high school and junior high, we've all had our things, but maybe something about being in it, you feel like you have some control. But then to watch your child who you love and adore and would do anything for have to go through that kind of thing and those kind of hardships is just heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking, and you feel like it's never going to end, and you don't know what to do, and you're praying for wisdom and discernment because you're like, how long do I let them fight it out versus, when do I step in? And there's no guidebook. I mean, that was the whole thing. Is I was like, I just need to read a book that tells me step by step what I'm supposed to do, and that book does not exist. I wish I could write that book because it would sell 1 million copies. But every situation is so different, so it's really hard to navigate, and it's so painful to watch your kid hurt.
It is. Yeah, the one thing not the one thing, but what I appreciate, one of the things I appreciate most about God, I'll phrase it that way, is that he can really just kind of turn anything on its heels and bring something beautiful from something so awful. Isaiah 61:3 talks about God giving beauty for ashes. And y'all went through that as well. Talk about that if you would.
And it goes back to that, I think, especially, talking about the different roles of a mother and a father. I think, for mothers and fathers, but especially moms, because I think our hearts are so tender. And, from the time you have that child, it's just a part of your heart walking around outside of your body. But what I realized was the very things I'm trying to protect her from, the very things that God is using to build character in her life and to build resilience and to build faith in him and to have growth. And, I've even told Caroline this after the fact. I'm like, you had the benefit of, you came from a family with 2 parents who love and adore you. We would cheer you on doing anything, like we're always going to be your biggest fans. But if she was going to be the warrior that I prayed that God would make her into, if she was going to be the leader, if she was going to have empathy and kindness and all of those things, how do you shape those things? Like, how do those happen? And I think as parents, sometimes it's surrendering and letting go and trusting that God is writing their story, even if that story looks very different than the story we would have wanted for them or hoped for them. And his is always going to be better. I mean, I can honestly say that. Like, I look back at everything Caroline went through in high school, and she would say it now too, I wouldn't trade it for who she's become and what it's forged in her that wouldn't have happened had she been, Miss Popularity with the gazillion friends, and life would have always been easy and perfect.
So true. Yeah, I remember, as I went through the rest of high school and college, one of the things that instilled in me going through that is there was, one instance in my whole high school career and college career where I think I maybe participated in some bullying, but I was so cautious about that because what I'd gone through, and I knew how it made me feel. So, God used it to give me a compassionate heart.
Yeah,
in
it's
that
true.
area. We're still working on a few others.
Listen, we're always a work in progress. Listen, there's always new things. There's always new, and it's, we even laugh now because I'm like, like I'll tell her when something happens, even now, and she just graduated from college, but we'll talk about a hard season. And I'm like, hey, this is your character building. And we're like, it's the worst. Like, let's just be honest. Character building times are the worst. But you get back on the other side and you're like, God did something in me during that season that couldn't have been done without that difficulty.
Yeah, God, why do you have to build my character?
It's terrible. It's
Enough
just
with the character building. You made a decision that I think must have been one of the most difficult. In spite of your mother being so difficult, the thought of severing that relationship. So, chapter 12.
Yeah.
Cutting off the source of the pain. I just hurt for you. I was like, I cannot imagine how difficult that choice must have been. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, it was really hard. And, you second guess. And I've had so many people, I feel like since the book, they're like, how do you know when to make that decision? And I'm like, that with a lot of prayer. I had really for years kind of been on this fence of, do I let my mom stay in my life? Can I let her stay in my life? And it had just gotten to the point where it was so continually toxic that I just thought it's never going to be better. It's never going to be. And it kept me torn up all the time. And what I began to realize was I'm not going to be able to be the wife and the mom and be as fully present in my family and my life as I want to be. I'm not going to be able to heal the way God wants to heal me if I continue to allow this in my life. And so I think it's hard as a Christian because you really balance, and I think you'll go to well-meaning people that are like, but the Bible says honor your father and mother, and honor your father and mother and all will go well with you all the days of your life. I mean, it's a commandment that's tied to a promise. But sometimes when that relationship is so broken and that person is so broken, I think the best way, where God brought me, was the best way to honor my mother was to walk away from that relationship, because what we were caught in was this constant dance of just dysfunction and toxicity, and it was just always so damaged. And so I really prayed, because what I knew was, if I'm going to walk away, I have to be able to do it without bitterness. I have to do it with forgiveness in my heart, because I thought otherwise I'm going to become the very thing that I'm trying to break. So if you can't do it with those things, I was like, it can't be out of anger. It can't be out of resentment. It can't be out of like, I'll show you, I'll just walk away. Like, it really had to be with grace in my heart for, we've done the best we can do, but this is it for me. But it's very painful.
I can't even imagine. But you have a sister, Amy. Let's talk about that. Just the sibling relationship, and how even as siblings we can experience the same things and see them differently. Tell me about your relationship with Amy.
Yeah. So Amy is my younger sister. She's 4 years younger than me. She would be the first to say, I let her read the book before it ever went to print, because I said, I want you to feel like this is fair, and I want you to tell me if it's not. But one of the things, and we decided later on in life that my mom basically had, she was bipolar for sure, but also had borderline personality disorder. And as you read books about borderline personality disorder, one of the hallmarks is that they tend to pit siblings against each other, because they don't want anybody to be able to team up against them. And so my mom had always treated us very differently. I'm a lot like my dad. And so, they got divorced. So spoiler alert, those two personalities didn't really go great together. And so she had always treated Amy very differently than me. I mean, Amy was always her baby. She always coddled Amy. She always made sure Amy was good. She always felt bad for Amy. Whereas anything good that happened to me was very much like, she made me know that I really didn't deserve that if people really knew who I was, they wouldn't like me. So, it's an interesting thing that two siblings can grow up in the same house, or three siblings, or however many, and have very different experiences. And so Amy realized, what was interesting though, is when I removed myself from that relationship, when my mom's venom didn't have me to go to, Amy did experience a lot more of that in later life. So she was able to see more clearly a lot of what I had dealt with. And she watched it. She watched it for years and always knew that my mom treated me differently.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Wow.
And it's hard. And it's created, for the years, like when my mom got so sick and Amy was taking care of her, that was a burden that she had to bear. And it's hard. It's hard to navigate that with a sibling when one person has said, I can't be in this, and the other person is still very much in it and dealing with it. I mean, that's a difficult road to navigate.
Yeah. If you're comfortable, talk about your last visit with your mom. What was that like?
It was, so my sister called me. Amy called. My mom at that time was living in an assisted living home in San Antonio, in the city where I live. And so Amy called, and she had let me know. She said, she's been diagnosed with this aggressive sarcoma. They're saying that she has weeks, maybe a month to live. She said, I just wanted you to know. And I said to Amy, and this is where I so appreciate Amy's grace, I was like, I don't know what to do. Should I come see her? And she said, only you know that. She said, that's your call. And so I really began to pray about it. Should I go? And what I kept telling God was, I have peace. I made my peace. Like when I walked away, I knew that I may never see her again. But what God kept saying back to me so clearly was, this really isn't about your peace. This is about giving her peace. And so I thought, I can do that. I can do that. So Amy went with me, and we went to the home where my mom was. And, it was so fascinating because I hadn't spoken to her in 14 years. And my mom was always beautiful. She was always a beautiful woman. And so to walk in that room and see this frail, old woman, because years of prescription drug abuse and all of those things, it had really aged her. But in that moment, what my mom said to me, and I was scared. Listen, I will be the first to say, I walked in there and I thought, I don't know what she's going to do. I don't know if she's going to sit up and start screaming at me. I don't know if she's going to make me feel terrible. But Amy said, Mom, somebody's here to see you. And she looked up and she saw me, and she patted like she wanted me to come sit on the bed. And she just looked at me, and the first thing she said, which, just feels like a Holy Spirit moment, she just said, sometimes it just takes time to work things out. And it was just the most grace-filled, it was almost like the voice of God spoke through her in that moment, to just be like, I'm going to offer you grace. I'm not going to come at you. And so it really ended up being this beautiful kind of closing moment. And I felt like in that time, and maybe there's something in between that veil of life and death, could she see things more clearly, where she just realized like this was what had to happen. And the beautiful thing was, as hard as it had been to walk away from my mom 14 years before, and all the times in between where I would question or wonder if that was too harsh, in that moment, I thought that time away from my mom was able to give me a grace and a love for her that I don't think I would have had I remained in that relationship and we had continued to tear each other down over the course of all those years.
Wow. Well, I'm glad for the ending. That's
Yeah. It was, and sometimes you don't get that ending.
No, you don't.
Sometimes you don't. I mean, it's just so it was such a grace-filled moment, and I'm so thankful that I got it. But what a gift, because I think a lot of people don't get that kind of closure.
It
No
truly
kidding.
was a gift from the Lord. I can
Right.
just, he just gave that to you.
Yeah. It
Yeah,
really
I think
was.
the hardest part would be for her to go pass on, and then you don't have that, and then you've got this thing playing in the background of,
Right.
Well,
Yeah.
let's talk about this. Why is it so important to heal ourselves before we are raising our sons and daughters in a healthy way? Why take care of you?
Because I think here's the thing. I think you pass down anything that you haven't dealt with. Any insecurity, any fear, the root of anything that's in us. And I think, that can be, we can name it and we can say it's addiction or it's depression,
Right.
or it's these things. But I think it can also be, where are our fears? Where are our insecurities? How do we see the world? Because that's our kids. This is what I always say. Like, we can tell them all day long, we can say all the right things, but they're going to watch how we act, and they're going to pay attention to how, listen, they're little hypocrite detectors, like if anything in you doesn't line up with what you're saying, they see it and they clock it, and they're going to make that decision. They're going to very much more live out what they see you living out than they are what you say to them. And so there have been so many places, there have been the big things for me, like the generational dysfunction of trying to be a better mother and healing and learning empathy and kindness and learning how to love myself so that I can love others better. But there have also been these things like, where am I letting my fear, my fear of what could happen or what might happen, or my anxiety. And those are things that I don't want to project on my daughter. I don't want her to carry those things, because here's the truth. They're all human. So our kids are going to have their own things. They're going to have their own struggles and their own battles and their things that they need to fight. But I think we need to do our best to heal so that we're not passing things down that don't need to be passed down.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
You're also right about, you realized a truth while watching trees in your neighborhood. Talk about that.
So we have these in Texas, they're called mountain laurel trees. They're beautiful. They get these beautiful lilac blossoms on them, and they smell like grape soda, and they're my very favorite thing. They bloom for like 2 weeks in March, and that's it. So like, enjoy it. That's it. And we have 2 in our yard. And for years, ours wouldn't bloom. And my husband is a landscaper. He owns a landscape company. So it just felt like the injustice of what, what are you doing? This is your job. Like, do something with our trees. And I would walk around our neighborhood, because I walk with my dogs, and I would see everybody else's trees blooming. And I'd be like, man, why are their trees blooming? Like, I know they aren't taking as good a care of their trees as we are. Like, we've done all the things. Like, we've fertilized, we've pruned, we've excavated, we've let more sunlight hit the roots. We've done all the stuff. But their trees were just, prolific in blooms, and ours were just terrible. And then one day, a couple of springs ago, when I was writing the book, I turned the corner, and all of a sudden, because ours are on the side of our house, I looked up and ours were covered in blooms for the first time in probably like 5 years. And I was like, oh my gosh, like, there they are. They're the blooms. But it was in that moment, what God said to me was, I was always working on producing those blooms. That was always happening. Like all that stuff that we were doing, and the pruning and the fertilizing and all of that was working. It just took a while to see the fruition of that. And I think sometimes we can look around. It was that moment of, we look around at everybody's life and you're like, well, your kids are doing great, and you just got this promotion at work, and your family's amazing, and my family's terrible, and my kid's failing math, and like, where are the blooms in my life? And I think it's so important to remember that God has always given us those beauty for ashes, and he's always growing something, even if we can't see it. And sometimes it just takes time for us to see the blooms in our own yard.
Yeah, that's true. So how would you encourage mom or dad feeling discouraged with the parenting journey and or what their teenager's life looks like much different than what they expected? Things like, I thought this would turn out different. And it's
I thought this was going to be great. This was supposed to be a lot of fun.
Right.
I would say, first of all, don't discount what God is doing in your life, in your kid's life. Like, don't discount what he's building. There again, it's like sometimes the blooms. I mean, I look at who Caroline is at 21, almost 22, and I think she wouldn't be this now if she had been something different at 15, 16, if she hadn't gone through some of the adversity and the hard times and the things that God's created. So it's, she's like the trees, where it was like there was all this pruning and excavating and hard stuff, but the blooms were coming. We just had to see them. And so I think you hold on. I think you make home your safest place, no matter what they're going through. I think you make sure that they know that they are loved, they are prayed for. I think you stay on your knees. I mean, listen, nothing will improve your prayer life like having a teenager. I mean, I think I said more prayers from the time Caroline was 15 to 20 than maybe any other time period in my life. And just to know that what you're doing is you're giving them roots that go deep. And if they have roots that go deep, then I think it's in Jeremiah 17 where it says, like, they will never fail to produce fruit. They will always stand strong, even in a drought. When storms come, they will stand strong. And what I love about that verse is it doesn't say that drought isn't going to happen. It doesn't say that storms aren't going to come. It doesn't say that those things aren't going to happen. What it says is they will be able to stand strong, and they will produce fruit in life in spite of those things. And just trust what God is building in your kid. I mean, it's a hard season, and none of us are going to do it perfectly, and they're not going to do it perfectly. And so I think we have to give a lot of grace, and it's like my husband said one night at dinner. We were laughing, and we were worried about something. And listen, I love a sports analogy because I'm a sports girl. And he was like, here's the deal. He was like, I trust my player. And he was like, at this point, we're kind of like offensive and defensive coordinator. We can kind of sit and say, here's what you ought to do. Here's what I think you should do. But ultimately, you got to trust your player. And more than that, you got to trust your head coach. And I was like, okay, that's a good thing. You got to let them figure some stuff out.
Yep, that's true. I do like, you kind of alluded to this, and that, their parents aren't perfect. I think that's encouraging for everybody to know.
Yeah. Yeah.
And their background could be how, and that goes back to, you getting yourself right first before you can parent well. But I think it goes back to what's their background, and what kind of stuff did they go through growing up, and did it affect them? And that's why you're being parented the way you are. But yeah, it's encouraging to know we're all messed up.
We are. Listen. We are.
Yeah.
We are. And that's where you just, you trust that God's going to cover the places that we can't. I mean, that's my prayer all the time, is God sees the things that we can't.
I like that.
He knows our kids better than we know them. He's going to try. I mean, we're going to drive ourselves crazy trying to be everything, and it's never going to happen. So trust that he's going to fill in the blanks where we get it wrong.
I like that. Cover the places I can't, God, because there's a lot of them.
Yeah, a whole lot.
So many.
Exactly.
It's like they're all the places
Especially-
they can't cover.
Yeah.
Especially when your kids are growing up and you're realizing, oh, they're not just a mini me.
That's
I
it.
think of my son when he was growing up, and he would take little odd jobs and always doing something mechanical. And I was blind to that being a real strength for him until he went into the Air Force, and they did this a testing, and it came back that he had this strong mechanical ability. My husband and I look at each other and go, oh,
Where'd that come from?
You can be just totally blind to the things that come easy to the kids and you start
Yeah.
focusing on the things you think need improvement because they're not acting exactly like you. So there's a lot to just having your eyes open, not only to the way you were raised, which affects who you are, but also who your kids are as individuals apart from yourself.
Yeah, it's so true.
Yeah.
It's so true. And I think to me, it's the most fun to watch them, and I say this now as my daughter's, 21, but to see who they're going to become and what they do, because it is so different where, you think when I was having a daughter, I thought, well, she'll just be like kind of a mini version of me. And she's so different from me. And it's made it such an adventure because I never know what she's going to do next. And she responds to things completely different than the way I would respond to things. But it's so clear that God created her to be her own unique person. And so it's so fun to watch them walk into the fullness of that.
Right.
Amen.
What a privilege to be there to do that.
Yeah.
And we have to remind ourselves of that as well. So,
Yeah.
I really picked that up from the book and how you allowed Caroline to kind of walk through these mean girl situations and hold her head up high. And you didn't do it for her except when it was appropriate. So
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, we got to let them fight their battles. Don't be afraid
hard.
to let them fight their battles. It is so hard. It is so hard. And the times that I would, I think in the book I talk about I would drop her off at school and, you're smiling and you're like, okay, have a great day. It's all going to be great. Remember, be kind. Da, da, da. And then I would drive off and just break down into tears. I would cry the rest of the way home. Never let them see you sweat,
I get it.
Funny. Oh, man. Well, thank you so much, Melanie. Appreciate your time. Been good.
Thank y'all for having me. Loved our conversation and just so appreciate y'all's time and being with me today.
You're welcome. Melanie Shankle, the book is Here Be Dragons. And maybe people might want to know more about you. Maybe how can we find you and listen to the podcast as well?
The best place to find me these days is on Instagram. I'm Melanie Shankle. I write little things there. I link to a lot of stuff there. The Big Boocast you can find wherever you listen to your podcast. It's on Spotify. It's on Apple Podcast. It's in all the places. So you can find us there. If you want to hear a lot about nothing, come join us for the Big Boo podcast.
Get after the Big Boocast. All right.
That's it.
Awesome.
I love it.
Thank you for your time. Really
All right.
appreciate it. It's been good.
Thanks, y'all. Have a great day.
All right. You too.